to Econelastic. I'm Joe.
And I am Andrew.
In today's video, we'll be covering the causes of disequilibrium unemployment.
And there are three causes, or three potential causes of disequilibrium unemployment. So the first one is real wage unemployment.
The second is demand-deficient or cyclical unemployment.
And the last one we'll be covering is the growth in the labour supply. So we're going to start with real wage unemployment. And there are generally two known ways that this can occur.
Yeah, so the first one, if trade unions deploy their monopoly power to drive the wages above the market clearing level.
Or it can also be caused by the government setting the minimum wage at too high a rate.
So this is seen graphically by Andrew's graph that he's kindly drawn for us. So the wage rate being driven up to W1 higher than the clearing wage rate of WE.
You would see an example of this excessive real wage rate in the 80s and 90s. We've got the data on the screen for you, and you can see this is caused actually at the time by the power of the trade unions.
Yeah, and the data is the unemployment level. So you can see because of the high wages, it is driving up the unemployment rate in the UK, and it's very high indeed.
Because it can't fall, or it's not allowed to fall because of the trade unions to the market clearing wage of WE on the graph.
Yeah.
Some people actually argue that higher real wage rates helps to reduce real wage unemployment.
The process that leads to this effect is that the extra wages paid to those still employed could lead to extra demand or consumer expenditure.
And this aggregate demand in turn leads to firms demanding more labour in an attempt to meet this extra demand.
So Andrew's going to draw this now in graph form, so we can see this effect by a rightward shift in the ADL curve. And this rightward shift reduces the gap between A and B. And as you can see, it's now reduced.
Yeah, smaller gap there than there was before.
Yeah.
However, we've had to think about this theory, and we do see a couple of issues. The first issue we see is similar to a reduction in the tax rate, in that the extra consumer expenditure that we're trying to incentivize may not necessarily be spent in the domestic economy.
Secondly, if wages are increasing, we know that firms generally respond by increasing the price of their goods, which is actually what we can see currently happen in the market. A lot of wages are going up, therefore it means it's pushing prices up as well. So
an increase in minimum wage generally has a bigger, or at least a more adverse impact on, say, the services and hospitality industry. As we know, more people in this industry do work for minimum wage. So let's just think about, say, a supermarket worker, for example, working minimum wage. Like a lot of us, they'll spend a lot of their income on food or food outlets and retailers who also rely on minimum wage workers.
Therefore, by increasing minimum wages, this increases those firms' cost and to maintain profit margins, they simply have to increase prices of their goods. So we would argue those people fighting for higher minimum wages will be no better off after inflation.
Furthermore, we've thought about this sort of from our point of view. So we're not on minimum wage, so an increase in minimum wage would make no difference to our income. However, if we think about, say now, McDonald's, we don't really go to McDonald's much, but it's a good example to use. Their price per meal has now gone up because they're having to pay their minimum wage workers more to maintain their profit margins. They've had to increase their prices. But from our perspective, we're not earning any more money. So we're now probably going to take our McDonald's consumption, say, from 2 times per month, and it's gone up in price. We'll probably now only go to McDonald's once per month.
Which obviously would negatively impact McDonald's and has the opposite effect of what the previous theory was predicting by increasing aggregate demand.
So the second cause of disequilibrium unemployment is known as demand-deficient, or it can also be referred to as cyclical unemployment, which is often associated with economic recessions. So again, we're going to explain this with the use of a graph.
Let's first assume the economy is at its peak of its business cycle. Now, if you don't know what a business cycle is, we do have a previous video covering that. In this position, the aggregate demand for labour and the aggregate supply of labour are in equilibrium at wage rate W1. There is no disequilibrium unemployment at this point.
So now let's imagine that the economy took a turn into a recession, and consumer demand in this scenario generally falls as people are less willing to spend in this recessionary environment.
Firms notice they are unable to sell at their current level of output. However, initially they will build up inventory of unsold goods as it takes time to adjust to this new level of demand.
Yeah, they've got a set of employees. They still want to produce as efficiently as possible with that level of employees. They're going to see how things go with this recession.
Yeah,
at least in the short term.
So in the long term, they will eventually have to cut back on production and therefore reduce the amount of labour they employ. Because of this, we would see a leftward shift in the ADL curve, which is Andrew's drawing now. So it would move from ADL1 to ADL2.
Which you can see on the graph.
Perfect.
So as we know from our previous video, wages are often considered sticky or sticky downwards. So it would be difficult for the wage to immediately fall to the new equilibrium point at wage 2. Therefore, we'll now experience disequilibrium unemployment from Q1 to Q2. You can see the difference here.
So the worse recession gets and the longer it lasts, the higher the demand deficient unemployment will become. So essentially what we're going to see on the graph would be a constant shift of that ADL curve to the left, and it will keep on going. Obviously, this process works in reverse. The economy begins to recover from the recession and enter its peak. So demand deficient unemployment is highly correlated with the business cycle. Again, go back to our previous video about business cycles and it will make a little bit more sense. And this is the reason why it's referred to as cyclical unemployment. And what you would see in graph form, the opposite of what we've shown, is a rightward shift in that ADL curve.
You may also hear demand deficient unemployment referred to as Keynesian unemployment. This is because Keynes believed that the deficiency in aggregate demand was the cause of the high unemployment between the First and the Second World Wars.
For some Keynesians, a stickiness in wages is not the only problem. For them, the problem lies in the low level of aggregate demand causes an equilibrium in the goods market at an output that is too low to generate full employment.
So this low level equilibrium in the goods market correlates to disequilibrium in the labour market. With lower aggregate demand, firms have lower confidence or at least lower expectations. For example, if they believe or their expectations are that the recession will continue, they will continue to not produce more and therefore not hire more labour.
If the outlook remains this way, the low output equilibrium will persist.
So if we think about Keynesian unemployment and his theory, and we refer back to the previous graph, which is still on the whiteboard, then a fall in real wages from W1 to W2 would not actually solve the problem. So demand deficient unemployment would still persist between Q1 and Q3. And the general cut in wages, so from W1 to W2, reduces workers' incomes and therefore reduces their consumption of goods.
This obviously would correlate to a fall in aggregate demand for goods, which would then cause a further reduction in the demand for labour. So the ADL curve that Andrew's now drawn would shift further to the left beyond ADL2 to create ADL3.
So by the time the real wage rate does actually fall to W2, W2 is no longer the equilibrium wage. The equilibrium wage has now fallen to W3.
Therefore, demand deficient unemployment still exists.
So finally, the last possible cause of disequilibrium unemployment is a growth in the labour supply. So if the labour supply increases with no corresponding increase in the demand for labour, then logically the equilibrium wage rate will fall, which we're going to show for you in a graph.
We start at point A, where ADL curve and the ASL curve intersects. If we experience an increase in the supply, logically, this will shift the ASL curve rightwards to ASL2.
Which I will now add. So again, considering that wages are often sticky downwards, the wage rate's not going to immediately drop to W2, the market clearing wage rate. It may over time, but it won't immediately.
Yeah.
Therefore, there's an excess supply of labour. The demand for labour has remained constant. So we're going to experience disequilibrium unemployment between A and B.
Thanks for watching our Econelastic videos. Please check out our other YouTube videos on a range of economic topics. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
Please also check out our website at econelastic.com. The link will be in the description for you. This is where you'll find our step-by-step dissertation writing guide, which is suitable not just for economics, but for a whole host of degree subjects. And it's where you can also book us personally for 2-to-1 tutoring sessions.
See you in the next video.